boy. Maggie, thank you so much for coming on to the Grin Gets Real podcast. I am so excited to be talking to you about just kind of B2B marketing tactics, but also taking a look from the reg tech side of things. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you, Katya. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So let's get started with just providing the listeners a little bit of context. If you could share a high-level overview of just your area of expertise.
So I am originally Italian, so I grew up in Italy, and then I moved to the UK and actually studied literature. So I studied literature in London, and that's kind of where my background and my love for language and writing comes from. After finishing university, I embarked on a career in marketing, and for some just by chance, I ended up spending the last 10 years in B2B marketing specifically. So that's very much where my expertise lies. And specifically in B2B marketing for startups. So I worked with a lot of startups, scale-ups, different stages in their growth. And my passion and, where I really, really thrive is in helping businesses build their brand, build their messaging from the ground up. So instead of going somewhere where all of that is already set up and it's already in place, what I enjoy is really helping businesses find their voice and help them stand out in the B2B space.
And I think I told you this in our pre-conversation, like really thriving on or in that startup world, it's a glutton for punishment, but also there's never one day that looks exactly the same. So I can definitely see that being very exciting. One of the things that I think is so interesting is that you are in the reg tech space. And I'd love for you to give like that 10,000 foot view definition of reg tech so that we can understand that area that you're currently in. And listeners, I promise I'm going to take you on this journey because what I really appreciate about reg tech is that it is something that's rather new. I was just telling Maggie, to me, it is what content marketing was, what influencer marketing was, conversational marketing, right? With the chat bots. So there is a journey for B2B for this, but give us a little insight on reg tech.
Of course. So RegTech, what it stands for in a nutshell is regulatory technology. So as such, it refers to the fast-growing sector of software and solutions that help companies, whatever they might be, whatever sector they might be, meeting their regulatory requirements more effectively. The term is fairly new. So supposedly, it was first introduced by the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the FCA in the UK. It's a financial regulator. And it was used to refer to a subset of fintech, so of financial technology, that helps companies meet their compliance requirements or their regulatory requirements more generally. So this is the very high-level definition of what RegTech is.
And what industries fall under RegTech? You said a lot of financial. Is it only financial?
It definitely started that way. So I would say that the first applications of RegTech have been in banking and financial services. And the reason for that is also historical in the sense that after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, regulators introduced a lot of new rules and a lot of new requirements to try and stabilize the financial system or to try and stabilize the financial system as a whole. And so for banks, for financial institutions, meeting these requirements manually was just not possible at all. So what they did instead is that they started relying on technology more and more. And a lot of entrepreneurs saw an opportunity there, and among them also the co-founders of Know Your Customer, which is the company I work for and the company where I had the marketing function. And the idea was really, okay, we have all these regulations. They are so complicated. They're really time consuming for our team. How can we apply technology? How can we apply artificial intelligence, machine learning, optical character recognition, whatever it might be, so that we are able to comply with these requirements more effectively without breaking the bank as well. So this is really the idea. So as I said, started in banking, started in financial services, but now, especially in the last few years, it has expanded massively. So the idea is that wherever there is a highly regulated sector,
Yeah.
RegTech has a place to be. So think about, think about real estate, think about the legal sector, think about gaming, gambling, the cannabis sector, all of this where companies have a lot of regulations they have to comply with.
Yeah.
That's where RegTech comes in.
It's that automation piece, correct?
Yes, exactly. It's how can we comply with the rules that the regulators ask us to comply with in a way that is automated. And it's not just us having to go through lists and checking things manually, but actually utilize technology. And another important element for RegTech, I think, is it's expanding a lot in sectors where businesses need to have a license in order to operate. So if their operations depend on having a license, that's where RegTech can help as well, because you have regulations, you have to meet those regulations, and technology helps you do just that.
So you have just broken that down, and I really appreciate the way that you've broken it down as well too, because I think it's definitely something that you can very much so get into the weeds of. But that next step for me is the marketing of something like this, right? Because it is so beefy and you can get just kind of into the weeds, and it's a relatively new term. I'm really interested in learning, honestly, how much educational content are you producing so that you're educating the audience that is going to gravitate towards, your company?
Of course. I would say that it's probably not as much as when I first started a Know Your Customer in 2018, but it's definitely a lot. There is still, because my company, Know Your Customer, really works in the RegTech space for financial services primarily.
Yeah.
The learning curve there has been, ongoing for quite a bit of time. So people are more aware of what it means, what the applications are, but not fully aware. And also there is still a lot of confusion regarding what different solutions do, what the regulations even are, how the regulations are changing. So we definitely need to do a lot of work on that, make sure that we produce a lot of content around that. One of the things, for instance, in an area where I think it's really important that we continue to focus on is the education about the attitude of regulators. So quite often we think about regulators as being very conservative, as being, very resistant to change and to innovation and technology, when in reality that is not the case, because they know the sector, they see how automation and new technologies can help actually protect the integrity of their sector better. But there is still among especially more traditional companies, there is this feeling that no, the regulator is against technology. The regulator doesn't want to use AI or whatever it might be. Well, that's not really true, or that's not always the case. So there is a big education piece there, a big educational piece there of really trying to tell our target audience, our target buyers, that regulators are open to change, are open to innovation, and they've shown this, time and time again.
I could definitely appreciate the education that's needed for that specific buyer as well. And I think that probably happens more often than not in like the B2B space. Like I think D2C, it's more of, well, I was going to say, don't quote me on this, but now we're on the podcast. But my thought is there are a lot more emotional triggers for other areas when you're consumer, when you're D2C, for example, right? Like that's more an emotional set of tools that you're kind of pulling from a marketing perspective, where B2B, you're trying to educate and make sure that someone identifies just kind of the value of what it is that you're providing. And I know it's very nuanced, right? Like that difference between both, because D2C world, you also have to show that there's value as well too, but there's much more of an emotional trigger. Whereas B2B, it's almost like you have a little bit more on the line. I don't know if you feel that same way too.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And another thing to consider is that in the B2B space, usually it's very rare that there's only one decision maker.
Yeah.
So there is definitely an element of, an emotive element that we need to keep in mind. We need to make sure we
Absolutely.
connect with the buyer, but the logical element, as you say, the value that we can add rationally also needs to be there and needs to be probably, front and center more than the emotional connection, because you know that you will go through different stages of procurement, different stages of review. You will be,
Mhm.
compared time and time again against, I don't know, 3, 4 other vendors that say they do the exact same thing that you do.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure to preempt as many of those objections or as many of those questions as you can.
Yeah, and my assumption is that not only are you looking at that buyer persona, but you've created a buyer persona for everybody that's going to be in that meeting where you're trying to show value, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
And everybody has, sorry.
oh, no, 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 go. And everybody has.
Everybody has a different perspective. So,
Yeah.
that in our case, the head of compliance will have a very different set of needs
Mhm.
compared to the compliance officer or compared to the IT person in the room. So it's so important to make sure that you understand what drives them emotionally, but also what drives them rationally, what they need to make sure that they are good at their job, what are their own KPIs, what are their own career objectives, and all of that helps you then hit all of those points when you're creating marketing or when you are having the sales meeting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the challenges well, there you go. What are some of the challenges that you are kind of facing in marketing B2B? Is it creating that one piece of content? And this is a loaded question because I know there's not this one piece of content. There's not this one thing that's going to appeal to all of those buyers, but I'd really be interested in just kind of learning from you and, especially with just kind of your background, what are some of the challenges you've faced in marketing in the B2B space?
I think there are 2 or 3 that really come to mind. And for me, the key one is the time that it takes to see the impact and the return of your initiatives
Okay.
because of the length of the sales cycle. So it can change slightly depending on different areas of B2B, but in general, there will always be quite a long delay between the time when you reach the person or the buyer and the time they actually buy. So how do you find the right balance between having measures in place to make sure that when that sale actually happens, you can trace it back to something you've done, and like losing hope too soon in a way, like it's
It's
really.
just around the corner. Have you just waited one more day?
So I think definitely that's the first one. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the challenges first, briefly, and then I can
I love
tell
it.
you a bit more about how I think we can address them. So first one, definitely that time that it takes between your initiatives, your strategies, your campaign, and the time when you actually see a return, you see a sale, you see a return on investment. The second one I would say is the lack of differentiation in messaging. And interestingly,
Okay.
I think it goes back to what we just said, the idea that, in B2C, it's much, or in DTC, it's much more likely to play an emotive note or play on certain
Mhm.
emotions.
Yeah.
While in B2B, we tend to be more rational, to, really dig a little bit deeper. And by doing that, quite often we'll end up saying the same things, because
Yeah.
in a way, like rational arguments are not as many as human emotions, in my opinion. So we'll end up saying kind of the same things, which could be a problem. Again, it's a challenge, definitely. And I think the third one really is the lack of time and the dilution of strategies and that you try to put in
Mhm.
place, because creating valuable B2B content for all the reasons that we discussed takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of effort. So
Yeah.
how do you prioritize right, and how you make sure that the time you do have and the resources you do have, you focus on the strategies that will work. So I think, yeah, these are kind of the 3 main challenges that I personally face. And I know that a lot of my colleagues in B2B marketing face as well.
Now, how do we overcome some of those challenges?
Yes.
We're gonna solve it all in this podcast.
Listen up. So, for the first one, when it comes to impact, I really think that you have to build an infrastructure of data and of metrics that can help you. It doesn't mean that you will see everything, the results straight away, but do invest in a data infrastructure early on. And it doesn't have to be super complex. It's just, for instance, knowing where the traffic on your website is coming from, and if there are any ways of seeing when people convert, when people contact you, where did they come from in the first place, and can you do more in that area? But really, so put those things in place so that you can understand the impact, even if the sales cycle is long. If your infrastructure is set up right, you will be able to see those connections and demonstrate your ROI, and then build a benchmark that you can improve on and hopefully shorten the sales cycle with as well. The second one I would say is, when it comes to the lack of differentiation and or the fact that a lot of B2B brands sound the same or talk about the same things. I think for that, it's important to invest time in finding your voice, finding your niche a little bit. It's something that is definitely done a lot, I think, in B2C, but not so much in B2B. So don't forget to do also things that help people remember you. So definitely the hard selling is important, but it's not the only thing. Because I read this study recently, which I found incredibly interesting, that says that apparently only 5% of buyers will be in market for a solution right now at any given time in B2B, which means that 95% of people are not looking to buy from you right now. So if you only put out content that is trying to sell really, really hard and pushing for the sale right now, people will not remember that. They will completely, you will go in from one ear, go out from the other ear, or they won't even see it. While if you instead find the right mix of content, and you can also provide value, you can provide news, you can provide good content, when the time comes that they're in market again, they're actually looking for a solution, they will remember you. They will remember your brand. They won't remember the promotion, like 50% off this week. But maybe they will remember the podcast. Maybe they will remember the white paper, whatever it might be. So really try to invest in content that adds value and is genuinely useful, which is, the principle of content marketing. But I think it's so incredibly important and helps you then stand out and build that connection that otherwise might be a bit hard to build.
I was actually reading this book last night that had a different drawing of the marketing funnel, right? We're always thinking of like the marketing funnel as this upside down triangle. And for this now I wish that I had a whiteboard so that you guys could see it. But the whole premise of it, and I'm 100% behind this, and it kind of sounds like what it is that you're talking about, is that most people live in that consideration stage where you do have to entertain, you have to educate, right? You have to inspire people in this, and I think that that's what B2B and D2C have in common as well too. While there is a little bit more emotive content for D2C, I think that if you're always, like you said, providing value, you're going to be top of mind. It's easy to remember, that one place that you're always finding the answer to that question that you have. So I love that you're saying to, continuously add value to that. It's fantastic.
And the third kind of challenge that I mentioned briefly was the dilution and lack of time that we all have in B2B marketing. And I think there it's, the power of prioritization and learning how to let go of things if they're not working out. It's really easy, I think, to get your channels and the numbers and the strategies and the campaigns that you have on at any given time get out of hand. So how can you make sure that, you review your stats? And we go back to that first point of having that data infrastructure. You review from time to time. You're very honest intellectually and see, okay, I don't see how this is going to work. This doesn't work the way I would like it to. and so let go and instead focus the time and the resources you have on the strategies that are working. It is painful because I know I get attached to certain campaigns or certain types of content, and I do genuinely think they're great. But then if the stats tell a different story, then you have to let go, I think.
Yeah, if it's not doing anything, it's not doing anything. You could love it. You could love it to death, but it's not. It should be put away. I really like that. What have you found to be sort of just kind of the most effective marketing strategies for B2B? And I don't even know if you can define them. I don't know if, out the gate, you're coming in and you're like, okay, we've got performance marketing, but this is what I mean by performance marketing. It has to be Google Ads for B2B. This is where we win. And you've got to be on LinkedIn. And you also have to go to XYZ events and you have to put out, consistent content on the website to educate. Is it as simple as that? Or have you found just other marketing strategies to be really effective in the space that you're in?
So I think definitely varies from business to business and across different sectors as well. But there are a couple of things that are really close to my heart, and I feel like they don't get as much attention as maybe they should. So I wanted to share a couple of those. One is what I call executive positioning, especially on LinkedIn. So the idea of utilizing your executive team's LinkedIn channels, but also Twitter if they're on Twitter, or whatever other channel they might have, to extend the reach and the engagement of your own kind of company and of your own profile. I think that also kind of solves, at least in part, the problem with differentiation that we talked about, because people are more likely to remember people than products. So don't just, let it to chance, or, some people will be some CEOs, some people will be very, very good. Some executives will be very, very good at social media naturally. They will be extremely good at personal branding and putting out stories, sharing articles, but a lot of people are not, and they have so much to do that it's also unfair to expect them to do it. So my advice would really be spend a bit of time to try and think about, okay, how can we utilize this channel? Because people will pay attention. The way that channels are also made, that social media platforms are also built, this right now, it's really to get organic reach from a company page is extremely, extremely hard. So especially if you're starting out and you want to build a bit of a presence, utilizing your executive team and making sure that you also think about their channels as an extension of your other owned marketing channels, I think is extremely powerful. And it's something that doesn't get as much attention as it should, I think.
Yeah. I think that's a good hack too, because I don't know that many people think to do something like that, especially in the B2B space.
And of course, then it becomes fun because you can get the specific executive involved, and you can craft messages and content that is very close to what their interests are. And so it's very collaborative, and it can also be a very good way of then getting ideas for your own content and your own content strategy, while also making sure it reaches many more people than it would otherwise. And then I think the other strategy that in my experience is incredibly powerful is anything that has to do with social proof. So that's, it can be anything. It can be through quotes, reviews, press releases, announcing a client, case studies. Of course, then the formats are endless. But I think social proof is really among the most powerful tools that we have in marketing, and in B2B marketing specifically, whatever your business is, whatever your sector is. I think it's important not only to show social proof on your owned channels. So, put quotes on your website or download case studies, all the traditional content marketing stuff. But also, I think in the last 10, 15 years, we've really seen a shift in how we operate as people. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, it's very rare that I buy something or go to a restaurant or I go anywhere without checking reviews before.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm very risk averse, and I want to see what other people have thought of that specific place or that specific product before. So the same way that in B2B, sorry, the same way that in B2C we get TripAdvisor, Google reviews, anything like that,
Yeah,
you can apply the same in B2B in more and more. Like there are a lot of platforms like G2 Crowd or Capterra, or there are a number of them.
absolutely.
And I know people use them, and at least in our experience, the conversion rate from those channels to a requested demo or a lead generated is a lot higher. Also because these companies spend a lot of money on SEO, making sure that they
Yeah,
are the first result when you search for, in our case, KYC platform or onboarding platform. They will
yeah.
always be among the 2, 3 results. So make sure that you have a presence there, and that your happy clients or happy customers are talking about you on those platforms, because it will be incredibly powerful to have that not just on your own website, but also on a third party platform that people will research independently when they're thinking about buying from you.
I'm so excited about that strategy because it dips into my world of influencer marketing. And I think that what you're describing is not typically how people would associate an influencer, right? Like I define influencer as someone who can can really drive people to take some sort of action. They have some sort of influence, right? Our customers do that for us. We don't call them influencers. We call them, our VIPs or our ambassadors and whatnot. And then the other thing that you're describing are like the key opinion leaders, right? They're not as many, but they are like people trust what it is that they're saying, right? It is the Gary V's of the world as well. It's that view from a business perspective, those key opinion leaders that can really provide that social proof to people. And you're right. I also do not I will look at reviews. I look at reviews. I have to also be served it many times. I don't know how many touch points is needed really for B2B. I know for D2C, because we're so inundated with so many things, like you basically have to plaster yourself out there. And you're always wanting to add a lot of value and information in while you're blasting that out. So are there as many touch points in B2B, do you think, as there are from D2C or B2C?
Yeah, I think so. Like the sales cycle, as you said, it's incredibly long. It's really, really complex. And maybe it's not so many touch points with the same person, but then it goes back to
Yeah,
what we said before. It's touch points across the organization.
for
So
everybody. Yeah.
exactly. So you need to make sure that you include content for them and you reach them throughout the sales cycle as well.
That's amazing. I feel like I'm taking up a ton of your time, but I've got one final question for you, and that's prediction time. I would love to hear what you see changing over the next year and let's get focused on just kind of your industry as well too. Uh, what's happening over the next year in reg tech, you think?
It's always really, really hard to make predictions, but I think I can try to make two. Um, The first one is that I believe there's going to be even greater adoption of RegTech. As we say,
Okay.
it's a fairly young sector. In established markets like financial services, like banking, the adoption is already quite good, but there is a world of possibilities out there for other sectors. So I think we will see that growing at an unprecedented rate in terms of adoption across industries, not just in financial services, not just in banking, just applications that we haven't thought of before. It will keep on expanding for sure. The other thing is that up until now, we've had quite a lot of. The other one is that up until now, we've seen a lot of companies popping up from everywhere. There have
Okay.
been a lot of smaller companies in different parts of the world. So as the sector matures more and more, we will see a lot more consolidation. So we will see companies
Mm.
merging, we will see companies being bought out by other companies. So I think there is also a maturing that has been happening for the last few years
Yeah.
that we will definitely see increasing even more in the next 12 months, I would say.
Yeah, I imagine companies obviously just get stronger the more I hate to use the word power, but power they have behind them, right? When you have 100 different companies that are all doing the same thing, merger and acquisition definitely makes sense in order to create like the ultimate solution that's going to help the most industries across the board. So I love that prediction. That completely makes sense. And I appreciate you providing your insights and your expertise for just kind of B2B marketing tactics. I definitely left with a nugget of insight, actually multiple nuggets of insight. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure, Katya. Thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast.